some of our notices first. So given that this is a MPO public meeting, we'll start off with our notice of non-discrimination. You are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. You can read the full notice of your rights and protections at www.bostonmpo.org/MPO_non_discrimination. We can go on to the next slide. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Logan Casey, MPO staff, at lcasey@ctps.org or 857-702-3706. And if we can go on to the next slide. So, as part of today's session for the tip how-tos, I will start off with a disclaimer. If any of you folks had attended our first how-to session on Thursday, last Thursday, the content of this presentation will be the same. We will have a question and answer session at the end if you do have further questions, but in terms of the actual substance here, this is identical to what was in how-to session number 1. I don't think that's the case for any folks on this call, but just saying that up front. However, today's session will cover some of the high-level Boston Region MPO basics as to who we are at the Boston Region MPO and why the TIP exists. We'll also discuss eligible project types that may be funded under the Transportation Improvement Program, the life cycle that you can expect a project to have if you are looking maybe today at initiating a project to eventually get it funded through the TIP, the application requirements and process that we have in order to move a project through the funding application process. And this will also include a demonstration of exactly how to navigate this form. For a disclaimer up front, we are using the same Qualtrics portal we have historically used for TIP applications in recent years, at least, but we are doing a new process of administering it, so it may be a little bit confusing to some. We'll also cover briefly what you can expect after you've submitted your application from MPO staff, including near-term dates related to when do applications close, but also longer-term dates in terms of when will you hear how your project scored, when can you submit feedback on your score, when may you hear that your project is being considered for funding, and when will you know for certain that your project has been selected for funding. So with that, if we can go into our next section, let's talk about what the TIP is. The TIP is part of represents the 5-year capital plan for all federally funded transportation projects in the Boston region. It is updated annually in the Commonwealth. Each metropolitan planning organization, there are 13 of them in the entire state, also does their own updates each year. And with these updates, there are solicitations for new projects. The TIP is related to 2 other key documents that you may be familiar with that the Boston Region MPO works on, and this is the Long Range Transportation Plan and the Unified Planning and Work Programs. The graphic shown on screen here on the right demonstrates how the LRTP, or the Long Range Plan, creates the framework and defines the visions and goals that are then eventually implemented through the short-term Transportation Improvement Program. And because this is a cyclical kind of relationship that these documents have, the Unified Planning Work Program tends to study the various needs or matters that may be addressed through the TIP later on. And again, the TIP is the LRTP is the means by which evaluation criteria are eventually defined for that program. And this is all eventually compiled into a statewide plan created by MassDOT with those other 12 MPOs. So if we can go on to the next slide. As far as what the TIP contains, there are several key areas in terms of how TIP investments should address different transportation needs in the Boston region. These are transportation equity, which generally refers to ensuring that the benefits of investments in the transportation system are equitably distributed towards different population groups in the region, ensuring that no group bears any disproportionate burden or enjoys some kind of disproportionate benefit versus another. Also, transportation safety for all users, This is not only a realization of Vision Zero safety goals, the effort to reduce traffic-related fatalities and deaths to zero in the long term, but also ensuring that in the near term, vulnerable users of roadways and other transportation facilities, including transit, rail trails, etc., in the Boston region can navigate these assets safely. There's also mobility and reliability. And on the subject of navigating assets, mobility and reliability refers to the knowledge and understanding that if you think you have a 20-minute commute, as I like to say, you know that your commute will take you 20 minutes to get into the office. It won't add an extra 5 minutes on one day, and that travel times generally do not vary too much throughout the day. Access and connectivity refers to how people can connect to places, whether that be work, recreation, or any errands that need to be run, and also ensuring that different projects may have intersections with other enabling land uses. Is this near to a Section 3A zoning district, new housing development, new public buildings, emergency facilities, etc.? On the subject of emergencies, we also have two related goal areas, and these are resilience and clean air and healthy communities. These are distinct in how we measure them, but they address generally a unified theme, this being the ability of the transportation system to bounce back when confronted with significant hazards or extreme weather events, for example. And clean air and healthy communities not only addresses things like reducing greenhouse gas emissions generated by transportation, but also ensuring that the transportation system is accessible to all and is also usable by a variety of individuals for healthy activities, for example. In order to actually implement these different investment program goals, the TIP has 6 discrete programs that fund a variety of project types. I'll be covering what each of these project types are later in this presentation, but to say up front, it is easier to list what kinds of projects the TIP does not include than what it does include in terms of what the breadth is of different funding opportunities available. If we can go on to the next slide, I'll then begin discussing project types and life cycles here. So as I mentioned, it may be a bit easier to say what the MPO doesn't fund, but we generally break up how the TIP is structured across these 5 years into 2 different kinds of program and project. First off, for our eligible project types, we have the longer term projects. As a 5-year capital plan that is updated each year, generally the last year of the TIP has the greatest funding availability, and therefore many of the projects that you may be seeking to apply for will find funding in federal fiscal year 2029, given that almost all of the money available is in that year. These projects are in what we call the core programs. These are the programs that represent the vast majority of MPO funding. These are the bicycle network and pedestrian connections programs, the Complete Streets program, intersection improvements, major infrastructure, and within each of these above programs, we also have a new investment opportunity this year through the MPO's Project Design Pilot. This Project Design Pilot, which I believe I will also expand on further, is an opportunity to seek MPO funding to design new projects that may eventually seek construction funding under any of the above programs here. As you can see on screen on the right, we have a few samples of different projects that the MPO has historically funded or looked to fund. This includes the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail over Route 2. I believe that's either in Acton or Concord. I am probably off base there. McGrath Highway on the top right, Rutherford Avenue in the bottom left in Charlestown, and also various flood control measures on roadways on the North Shore part of our region. I believe the picture on the bottom right is in Ipswich. If we go on to the next slide, we also then have the nearer term projects. So in addition to the core programs that the MPO offers, there is also the MPO's Community Connections program. This is a quick builds program to really function as a first and last mile connections program. A lot of our application volume is actually driven by this program, despite the fact that it represents about 2% of overall MPO funding here. It is, however, implemented in federal fiscal year 25. So if you are looking for nearer term improvements in your community, this is the path to take. With that said, there are limited opportunities to find improvements in this program by virtue of how quickly it implements the work. This can include painted bicycle lanes, procurement of bicycle racks, bike share. Not only have we historically supported the expansion of the Blue Bike system in the Boston region, but with this year, we are now also supporting replacement of bicycle racks. for any that maybe have reached the end of their useful life. I would also mention as well that this bike share program may not necessarily be exclusive to Blue Bikes. If you are a group of communities further out in the region, there may be opportunities there as well. We also have microtransit pilot programs for 3 years for those that may be seeking to implement some form of smaller scale transit for their communities to fill in gaps not addressed by regional transit authorities or the MBTA, and wayfinding signage. We're taking some false credit here. The picture that you are seeing on the right in Medford is actually from MassDOT's Shared Streets and Spaces program, but it is representative of the kinds of work that we would be wanting to administer through this program, given it's new this year. Some may recall, those who have applied previously for the MPO's Community Connections program, that historically there were also bus lane and transit signal priority projects available through Community Connections. With the advent of the Transit Transformation Program, municipalities should now apply for transit transformation funding in order to access that transit signal priority and any bus lane projects through there. Just given that it has been reclassified, that money is still available to access for that project type. We can go on to the next slide. We can then discuss the project life cycle. Now, disclaimer up front, the slide that I just discussed with Community Connections and Transit Transformation does not necessarily apply to this life cycle. However, for all other projects, complete streets, bike and ped, intersection improvements, major infrastructure, most will follow this lifeline. Generally speaking, the project life cycle is a parallel process between one of two parties that work very closely together. In addition to the Boston Region MPO, we work very closely with folks over in your respective MassDOT highway districts in order to initiate and scope out different projects that may use federal funding. A project can start in one of two places if you're looking to do a highway project. You can either have your discussion first with your MassDOT highway district. For example, in the Boston Region MPO, we have District 6, 5, 4, and 3. And you can also start with a conversation with MPO staff. Generally, no matter who you start with, the other party will then learn about the project and may reach out to you. On the MassDOT side, you would have two different key deliverables to start out with your project's life. This includes the project need form and project initiation form through the Massachusetts Project Intake Tool. The shorthand for this now is the project scope. At a minimum, all projects that are seeking federal funding should look to obtain a project scope as early as possible. In particular, if you are looking to apply for the Boston Region MPO's project design pilot, we strongly recommend that you look to initiate your projects now through the Massachusetts Project Intake Tool and get that scope in. In addition, once we have an idea on what you are looking to do with your projects, MPO staff will then add your project to what is known as the TIP project universe. What the universe really is it is a running list of different projects and ideas that MPO staff have identified throughout the Boston region. And functionally, we are using it as a tracker just to monitor what progress is being made on municipal priorities that we expect will eventually seek funding for construction here. Once your project at a minimum receives project review committee approval through the MassDOT process, and ideally has obtained a 25% level of design through continuance of maybe your environmental permitting and right-of-way processes as well. Right-of-way is especially preferential here. You may then apply for that project to be evaluated with TIP criteria through MPO staff. The discussion that we are having today coincides with what would be the application period and eventually next winter and into the spring, the evaluation cycle. Based on the findings of these evaluations, which, as I mentioned earlier in this meeting, there will be draft scores provided to proponents that they may then provide feedback on before being finalized. A program recommendation is made to the MPO such that there may then be a portfolio of projects to be selected from for TIP funding. Once those projects are selected, they are quote unquote programmed in the TIP with a year for them to have their funding obtained. And eventually, if design continues on track, all public meeting deadlines are made and all other factors to ensure the readiness of the project, it will then advertise for construction and can begin with shovels in the earth. So with that, if we can go on to the next slide, we can start talking about what the application requirements are here. So if we can go to, okay, so for the application requirements, as previously mentioned on that last slide with the graphic there are no written prerequisites for the transit transformation or community connections programs. However, we would recommend that you confer with key stakeholders in advance of these programs. For example, if you are seeking funding for a transit signal priority project and you operate in an MBTA service area, you should have a letter of support from the MBTA endorsing your project, just to confirm that you have actually spoken with the transit operator. Similarly, with community connections, if you are looking for, say, a bike share investment in the Blue Bike system, we would ask that you will have worked with MAPC just to make sure that they are aware, or I should specify the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, to make sure that they are aware that you are seeking this Blue Bikes funding, just given that they hold the contract and they perform that interlocal coordination between different municipalities on that front. With regard to the project design pilot, because this is a pilot, it is its first year and it's somewhat unique here, we are only requiring that the project be initiated at the time of application, or if there is some difficulty in actually getting that initiation, written acknowledgement and support from your respective MassDOT highway district may also function as a substitute if there's a tight deadline that must be made there. I will specify, though, that this is for new design activities only. Because this program uses federal funding, there are restrictions on eligible uses of federal funding that come into effect that you may not necessarily be familiar with or have not necessarily applied, in the form of using either your Chapter 90 or other state funding like MassWorks or your local funds to design a project. In addition, we also, for our construction programs, strongly prioritize projects at a 25% design level. There are different thresholds by which different stakeholders define what 25% design is. For the Boston Region MPO, if your 25% is submitted to MassDOT, then we will accept that as the 25% design threshold. You may notice that perhaps on your website it says 25% design resubmission or 25% approved. In our case, it's just an initial submission can count. There are also some limited exceptions here, but they tend to be very limited. So for example, let's say that you have a very straightforward nuts and bolts bridge replacement project that's at 100% design and it has project review committee approval. That may be an exception that gets triggered there. But again, it's a very limited case-by-case basis on that front. So with that, if we can move on to the next slide, we can then run through an application process before I get to a demo on that. So as previously mentioned in this meeting, the application portal will be done through an online survey portal held by Qualtrics. There are two different forms here, which I will demonstrate on the website shortly. One for the unified core programs. The core programs here refers to the bicycle network and pedestrian connections, complete streets, intersection improvements, and transit transformation scorecards. And there's a separate community connections form. Historically, the community connections form was a unified form for all project types. This time we have broken it out for each of the individual items. So with community connections, you would see one for bike lanes, one for bike racks, bike share expansion, microtransit, and wayfinding signage. I also have a link on screen here, which is www.ctps.org, which I will now drop into the chat actually for the TIP development page. If you would like to follow along with this demo, the TIP development page really is one-stop shopping for various key dates in the TIP process, and where you can not only obtain your application forms, but also the relevant scorecards for each of the project areas to get some understanding of what rubric your project will be graded against. So with that, if we can move on to the next slide, I will now take control of the screen and move on over. Okay. So let me scroll back to the top of the page here so folks can actually see it. This is the TIP development page for federal fiscal years 2025 to 2029. This is the primary page where you can find all applications here. Historically, the applications have lived on different sites and different places on the MPO's website. We're trying to do it all in one place to limit confusion versus what we had last year. But at the top of the TIP development page, you can see that we have a list on the top left that lists an overall TIP process describing how what we're doing right now between October and December is generally MPO outreach and also solicitation of new projects for applications. December to February is generally an analysis and evaluation period for new project applications. And in March, you will start to see recommendations being made as to what projects may be funded. There will be a draft project list released for public review, generally in April into May. And that draft list will generally function as the first indicator of whether or not your project has been selected for funding. On the right side of the screen as well, there's also a full timeline of key dates and tip development, which I will not cover in this presentation here, but it's also a key thing that you should keep track of as we go through this process, as you may find key MPO meeting dates if you would want to come to express public support for your project, as one example. We also have resources on this website to describe how to initiate a project, including access to the Massachusetts project intake tool that I mentioned previously, and the means by which one may obtain the necessary account information to use that tool. MPO staff are more than happy to also have this kind of discussion over email if you would prefer, and I'm also receptive to phone calls as well. So for the project application and evaluation, as you can see on screen here, there are two sections. There's the core investment programs, and below it, the community connections program. You will also notice that there are disclaimers for the major infrastructure program at the very bottom that notes that any major infrastructure project will be classified as such after application into any of the other investment programs. The reason being is that a major infrastructure project is not one that we would have municipalities apply for outright. It is instead defined by the long-range transportation plan there. So for a demo of how this works, you would generally, let's say if you want to review in advance a bicycle and pedestrian scorecard, you could select that link. And let me change my screen share to actually show what is going on the screen right here. You could then move through and then pull your scorecards for each of the relevant project areas you may want to apply for. So let's say I want to build a new rail trail and I may want to put bike racks on that trail in the near term. I could not only pull up the bicycle rack scorecard here and run through each of the different project areas, total points that can be earned under it, also go through the bicycle lanes and pedestrian project there. To also specify as well, while I'm on this topic, you can apply for multiple different project types in a given tip cycle. The only thing that constrains you on that front is your ability to fill out as many applications as you can. We would, however, ask that if you are applying for multiple applications, that you do prioritize, or rather state which priority you have for what project should be considered for funding first. So without further ado, this is on screen here, the actual application form that you may see if you wanted to apply for a project like Complete Streets or a shared use path on a given street that you have right now. There's a greeting and a landing page here. And one of the advantages of this system is that not only is your application open for a full 2 months from, or I should say until December 31st from when you seek to begin it, but you can also exit and return to it at any time. And in most cases can backtrack throughout the different phases of the application in case you want to obtain additional information in the future. Now, with that said, this first page is generally basic project information, points of contact, any position in your agency, and other items there. You can see that there is only one name listed here generally. Feel free to add multiple in these fields. They don't get exported into any kind of Excel table that will break if you do that. On subsequent pages, you can observe here that there are lists for project names and numbers if applicable. We would ask that if your project has been Project Review Committee approved by MassDOT, please use the 6-digit project ID number that was assigned there, and to the best of your ability, the project name that MassDOT also assigned it, just so it's consistent with their own internal conventions there. We also have fields for the current project design status and the current project cost estimate. This refers to the total federal participating cost. Functionally, this is the all-in budget that you are expecting to expend in the interest of moving this project forward. This can generally be the same as the next field, which is the total funding amount requested from the Boston Region MPO. The only exception, which is key here, is that let's say your total project cost estimate is $10 million and you have a $2 million federal earmark, you would ask for $8 million. But again, if you have any questions here, feel free to reach out to us because we know that these are kind of case-by-case examples. This is the next key part here. So there is a drop-down selection here, where you would indicate which project or investment program you would be interested in applying for. Once you select this and move on to the next page, your ability to move back to those initial contact information fields may be constrained. For purposes of this demo, I'm going to select Complete Streets here. And I'm also, just for purposes of demonstrating, going to say yes to the project design pilot. The application form for construction and design is identical, But if you apply for design, you are not applying for construction in that case there. In this case, we do expect that while the applications for construction and design not only have the same form, but also the same criteria, that the level of detail for the project design pilot will be much less by virtue of a lack of design progress than we would see for construction. We then have a general description of what the project scope of work is and project goals here. Goals being what kinds of deficiencies are you looking to address? And very key here under project location and files, please attach anything that you have available, especially with regard to ArcGIS shape files, to identify where the locations you are looking to address are. And you can also include your design files, letters of support, or concepts. I will mention that over the scoring process, you may find that you have updated designs that come in or additional letters of support between, let's say, December and March. You are more than welcome, if not encouraged, to send additional project details to MPO staff even after you have applied if updated materials come through here. You do not need to have everything available at the time of submission, but again, we would ask that there be a 25% design in place at the time, or at least imminently about to be released. So moving on to the subsequent areas of this application here, you can see that we have existing condition fields and prospective condition fields for each of the anticipated users of a given facility. This applies to pedestrians, bicyclists, and we also have descriptions here for transit use, transit assets, truck and freight traffic, and other proposed improvements there, not only for different modes, but also explicit improvements, let's say, to physical geometry of an intersection here. We would ask that you try to fill out these forms to the maximum extent of your ability to do so. But again, we do understand that you may not have all information up front. You can come back to this as you obtain information later. And while you do not have to fill out all of this information, it may impact your final score if you do not. There is a final confirmation about 2/3 of the way through for the application that you will be applying for the project design pilot if you tagged apply for design funds earlier in the presentation. Afterwards, you will then be addressed with those last two vision and goal criteria areas I mentioned previously, resilience and clean air quality, or I'm sorry, clean air and healthy communities. The resilience category generally refers to the flood adaptation, stormwater mitigation, and other activities there. But the most important one to keep an eye on here, and that is an exception for the design pilot, is the emissions estimates for state greenhouse gas reporting requirements and CMAQ eligibility. This is a lot of information and a lot of numbers right here, so it's very unlikely you will have the answer to all of these. If you do, all the better for me. But functionally here, we are not expecting that projects that are looking for design pilot funding fill this out. This information generally refers to the kinds of information we would need at the Boston Region MPO to apply a very specific funding type, congestion mitigation, air quality funding, to these kinds of projects. However, if you are applying for a community connections project or a bicycle lanes and pedestrian connections project or a complete streets project with a lot of pedestrian and transit uses, there is a strong likelihood that this information will be asked of you, even if you do not fill it out in the initial application form. Again, it makes our life very much easier if you fill this out now, but there's a strong likelihood that if you are, let's say, just replacing a bridge, that this may not apply. Again, though, if you have any questions, do feel free to reach out to us, and we can give you a general idea as to whether or not this page is relevant to your application. And then with that, you would then have completed the application process for the Boston Region MPO's TIF. You would generally receive a confirmation email and could then wait and see how your project scores. I'm going to stop share here so we can go back to the presentation, and then I can kind of describe what happens after you have completed your project application for MPO funding programs. So as stated, you may expect that there is a confirmation email that will be received after you complete your project application. But again, throughout the entire application process, not only can you stop and go back to it over time, but you should also email MPO staff, myself, Ethan Lapointe, and Logan Casey, if you have any questions, want to confirm that your project was successfully submitted, and of course, attach more files because you may have multiple folders for letters of support, design, or other items there. You are welcome to attach any additional information as necessary, and we are likely going to follow up with any additional questions we may have because every project is unique. And again, you can add your letters of support over time. You do not need to front load information here. We have taken letters of support as late as May for a project that may be seeking TIP application funding here. It is a living document. It is a long-term process here. But I would say that the more community engagement and outreach you conduct now, the easier it will be later. MPO staff will also notify MassDOT in January when the application period closes with a full list of projects that MPO staff received. We would request that if you are applying to anything but the Community Connections program, that you notify your respective MassDOT highway districts that you have moved to seek funding through the MPO's funding programs. We can go on to the next slide. I'll then reiterate some prerequisites here. So again, to reiterate, all projects besides the Community Connections program and the Transit Transformation program should be listed in the Massachusetts Project Intake Tool. To say they should be initiated at the time of application with a scope in hand by MassDOT. This is a minimum for all conditions. If you are looking for construction funding, but not necessarily design funding, the project should be at 25% design. Again, Community Connections and Transit Transformation are exempt, and the design pilot only requires project initiation and submission of that very basic scope of work. If you are unsure, please talk to MPO staff. We will try to address you to the best resource possible or the best pathway to apply for a TIP funding object. In addition, I'll also mention here the TIP is just one way that you can get funding for your project. So if you're not sure if the TIP is right for you, just feel free to reach out to Logan or myself, and we can also direct you to other funding opportunities that may be available. We can go on to the next slide. We have some new. So for one, today is November 9th, 2023. Applications opened up November 1st. This is a longer application period than we have traditionally done. Usually it's about 6 weeks, but the bottom line is you should apply now if you are looking for any funding applications here. These closed December 31st, 2023, and I will say that historically, the MPO has been receiving fewer applications each year for our funding programs. We are trend this year. So if you think that it's going to be a very competitive field, which it may be, the more project applications we have, the happier we are. So don't feel cautious or afraid to try. As far as interim feedback after you complete your application, we are hoping to get feedback to applicants around February 2024, such that you may provide input and or criticism on how we've scored your project, and we can incorporate it if we think we may have been off base on something. Project selection generally starts in March and concludes in mid-April release of the draft TIP. And throughout this entire process, if you're interested in how your project is doing, whether or not it's going to be selected, and if it's selected, what to do next, please reach out to myself or Logan Casey with questions. My email is elapointe, Lapointe, @ctps.org, and Logan's is lcasey@ctps.org. I'm just going to drop my email in the chat with my phone number as well, for those who may want to reference it. But in the meantime, if we can go on to the next slide, we can now open the floor to questions and answers. So I know this was a lot of information to cover in a short period of time. So I'm more than happy to help if anybody has any questions here. Yeah, Kristen.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this. It's been really helpful. I was just curious if there was a community connections grant that a community was leading the charge for, and it was regional. So there were other municipalities that were working together. Would they apply under the lead town and just note that other communities are working with them? This would be for a bike share program.
Yeah, absolutely. So generally, yes, we would require that there is a letter of support from each of the towns just to confirm on that, and that each town also list a point of contact. We actually prefer when municipalities work together to apply for a project under one effort. The reason why I kind of remarked there was because in the case of bike share in particular, actually traditionally municipalities have applied separately, but you could do one joint application there. Again, so long as we just have a point of contact for each municipality, just in case we do have the contracts as separate, should be fine.
Great. Thank you so much.
Charlie.
Hi, Ethan. Thanks so much. Great presentation. We have a project that we submitted for the RCN grant, and we have several letters of support, but I'm afraid that they are not addressed to the Boston MPO or CTPS. They are addressed to Pete Buttigieg. Can we submit those similar letters for the same project, or should they be reworded and rewritten for the MPO?
Given that the Boston Region MPO is not identical to the United States Department of Transportation and function, you could in the near term submit them to indicate that you have support, but we likely would not publish them. We would ask that you do obtain letters that are addressed to the Boston Region MPO there. You do not, however, need to change the wording of the letter. It can be the same kind of boilerplate language there, just a different addressee.
Great. And final question. We were believe the project was tabled for further consideration at the last PRC meeting. Do you know the date of the next PRC meeting, and what's if we are able to have a project number before the deadline? I would submit it, but if not, could we indicate that we're expecting one? How does that work?
So in this case, actually, I'll just reiterate too, for those who are seeking the project design pilot, you do not need PRC approval to seek design pilot funding. It is just an advantage if you have PRC approval at the time of application. The next PRC deadline, I believe, is November 22nd to be considered. I believe that in Cambridge's case specifically, the project will appear at the next one because it was tabled at the last one, so it's just going to get rolled over there. But it may help to confirm on that front, and I'm more than happy to kind of help facilitate that. But again, just to reiterate, if any folks on this call are looking for design pilot funding, you just need to have it initiated at the time of application. The review committee at MassDOT does not necessarily have to have approved it as of yet. We just want to make sure that when you apply for your project, MassDOT has something that they can then look at in their system to also know what it looks like, just because MassDOT will be the party responsible for implementing the project in the long term.
That's great. Thank you.
Kristen, I don't know if your hand is still up from the question earlier, if you have a follow-up. Oh, never mind. Sorry.
Sorry about that.
That's a mistake. Jen.
Great question. First of all, thank you again for all this information and for your efforts to help us kind of troubleshoot and figure out what to be advancing in Boston. Question is, if for the community connections and transit transformation programs, when would typically the funding become available if a project were selected in those programs?
Great question. So the community connections and transit transformation programs are the near-term projects. So if you were to apply this between November and December for these funding opportunities, you would likely know if your project was selected in April. Once the TIP is finalized and we have an approval from the federal government on the statewide transportation improvement program, usually happens in September into October. You can usually expect that you could start taking effect October 1st. That said, the contracting process can sometimes take some time. So you can get ready and kind of stage your contracts over the summer. Chances are it will likely happen sometime in the fall, as far as when you can first start drawing down the money. I'll also take this opportunity to mention that if there are any folks on this call who have a ongoing microtransit project, so let's say you are in year 2 or year 3, given new conditions that we have on the application, you do not need to reapply for your 2nd and 3rd year of funding, but we may ask that you provide data to back up how well your project is performing over time as well. I will also use this opportunity to mention that let's say your community has a project in federal fiscal year 27 or 8 of the current TIP, you do not need to reapply to keep that project on the TIP. So long as that project remains on track and on time there, it will stay in that year. If there is anything that changes, we will work with you guys on a case-by-case basis just to make sure that any municipality's project is working out there. Jack.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the size of the pool of money that's available?
Yeah, absolutely. So This is a tricky question because the tip is a living document, but we generally have some expectations. So each investment program the MPO has generally tries to hit a certain target of funding allocations. In general, the Boston Region MPO receives anywhere from around 150 to $160 million in funding each year from MassDOT to prioritize regional projects. Some of this money is sort of carved out in advance. So the Community Connections and Transit Transformation programs actually carve out 2.5 to $6.5 million in the case of transit transformation in order to address funding opportunities using more fixed amount. For Community Connections, there is about $900,000 available this year. While we set aside $2.5 million for it, we have about 7 to 8 ongoing microtransit pilots that have drawn down against future years of funding. So there's about $900,000 there. With that said, projects tend to change over time. So in federal fiscal year 2025, if, and this is not something that we want to happen, but if a project that is let's say a $5 million project gets delayed out of federal fiscal year 25, there may be an opportunity to fund more projects under the Community Connections program than that $900,000 has available. Don't want to muddy the waters too much on it. In terms of the big chunk in 2029, there's another qualification there. So that is likely going to be around $160 million. We do not have confirmation on that, and we likely will not know until February. We advise that if you're interested in that, you keep tabs on MPO meetings around that time. More than happy to help notify there. But of that $160 million, again, we have ongoing obligations to certain projects. So there's about $10 million that goes to supporting the set-asides for the Community Connections program, the Bike Share Support Program, and the Transit Transformation Program, and then around another $60 to $70 million that is going towards major infrastructure projects that are going to continue into 2029. That said, there's about $80 to $90 million for new projects in 2029 alone. There's also other funding available in fiscal years 27 and 8 for projects that may be a little bit ahead of schedule in their life cycles as well. But again, the tip is a living document. Anecdotally, I can tell you what it is today, but last year in the federal fiscal years 24 to 28 tip, we had significant funding availability in fiscal years 24, 5, 7, and 8. Generally, we know what the funding picture looks like in March. So for now, I would say apply because I think there's good funding availability now. There may be even more than I think. Sorry if that didn't really help answer the question.
That was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Right, I don't know if if there aren't any other questions. Oh, Jen, sorry.
Actually, I'll defer to Tina since I've asked a question, and then you can move back to me after.
Oh yeah, of course, Tina.
Hi, Ethan. Great presentation. Thank you. My question is this, the project design pilot, just confirmation that it is not a reimbursement funding program and there is no match?
So the project design pilot, there is a match. There's a 20% match, and
you.
it is reimbursement based.
Okay.
So the reimbursement basis is when the municipality receives an invoice from their consultant, that invoice would be submitted to MassDOT, and then the municipality would receive reimbursement within 30 to 60 days. It is not a lump sum reimbursement. It is a per invoice reimbursement. For those on the call, and for those who may be watching the recording later, if your municipality has obtained a federal earmark in the past, let's say for design, which I know several municipalities like Dover, for example, and Brookline have these for various projects, this project design pilot through the MPO will be structured and administered in the same fashion as those federal design earmarks are being administered.
There was a part 2 to the question, if I may, Ethan.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So if you are receiving funding through the project design pilot, how does that, could you just explain briefly how that rolls into then having the full project past the 25% design threshold, how you get that funded through the tip? Does it sort of flow automatically? Like how does that go? Especially if you get it in FY25. Thank you.
Yeah, so generally speaking, every project that we are looking to fund through the project design pilot will be one that we would like to fund for construction as well, which means any project selected for design funding is not guaranteed to get construction funding, but is a strong contender later down the line. In these cases, what would generally be required is that the MPO will fund design to 100% of the project's design costs. However, I should say 100% design level, 80% of the overall cost, given the need for a local match of 20%. Once the project hits 25% design, that project is then eligible to also, in tandem, apply for construction funding. When the project is ready to construct, we'll determine what year that construction funding is added. But generally speaking, the municipality would then have 2 line items in the TIP. There'd be 1 line item for the design so that it may continue its design life cycle until final. And then there would be a 2nd line item for construction. Again, right now, if you refer to kind of some of the design earmarks that we have on the books, there are certain projects like the Border to Boston Trail, for example, up in the northern part of the Boston region, where there are design earmarks in the TIP that indicate where the design funding is coming from. And then within that project description, what the construction project line item number is. So functionally, there is no guarantee that the project will be selected for construction, but it is a very strong contender. And there would be a separate application later down the line to go for that construction funding, just to
Thank you so
create
much.
that 2nd line item.
Perfect.
I can jump in. Just wanted to confirm my understanding from previous that the project design pilot, if a project has already been advertised for design and a consultant has been selected, that would not be eligible for the project design pilot because there would be a separate process for procuring.
We would strongly advise against that, but functionally, yes. The reason being is that with the usage of federal funding, there would need to be an entirely new procurement that takes place, which would mean that your municipality would need to start over from scratch functionally. Or I shouldn't say from scratch. So for example, if you have done preliminary survey, public engagement, if you have very basic concepts, that can still count and may still be built upon with the design funding. Anything that it happens really after scoping is something that would need to restart if you are selected for funding under the design pilot there. If you're doing pre-scoping, you're fine. Scoping and anything more mature than that, probably not. I will take this opportunity again per Jen's previous question actually around timing. Funding for the project design pilot in fiscal 25 would be available as early as October 1st, 2025. So this may be a pilot program for those of you who may be looking more long-term at a project you would like to get started on around a year from now. If you have something, for example, a road that was washed out in some of the flooding over the summer, you may want to look for something more near-term. And again, as I mentioned previously, the TIP is just one funding source. And, as the Boston Region MPO, we want to assist municipalities in finding all funding sources that may be available to them for projects. So even though I'm officially the TIP manager, feel free to reach out to us if you think or are looking for other funding opportunities that might be a better fit for your projects.
I think that's probable.
Okay, so with that, unless there are any other questions, which again, we still have 10 minutes left in the Q&A, so I'm happy to answer anything. I don't know if we have another slide after this, but I will just reiterate that applications are open today for the TIP. My contact information is listed in the chat. Again, it's elapointe@ctps.org, and my cell phone number is 857-702-3703. Applications will remain open until December 31st. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And again, this recording will be made available online for those who may want to go back and refer to it. I believe we will also make the recording of the first session as well, for those who may want to look at that question and answer session for additional information. But with that, thank you to all for coming today to this TIP how-to session, and I'm looking very forward to seeing all of your applications. And good luck.